Okay. So what we're really here to explore is triggers. And when we use the term triggers, at least here in the American West, we use it from a psychological standpoint, really as a stimulus that causes intense negative emotions or memories, often related to a past trauma, right? So if you look at this word bubble, for those who can see it, distress, anger, smell, overwhelm, loneliness, we tend to think of this as a negative thing, and it is. The things that tend to be provoked can be very uncomfortable and can be difficult past memories that feel very, very present and real. So in Mingjue, we really begin to look at triggers differently as a stimulus that causes buried emotions to be harmonized, for our inner states to be purified, and for our consciousness to wake up. And so through Mingjue practice, how might triggers transform from events that provoke strong emotions and old wounds to ones that invoke universal love and quantum healing? So that's really what we're going to explore together. And this is really embedded in ancient wisdom, right? Whoever invented these characters way back when, the Chinese phrase for crisis is wei ji, so danger and opportunity. So how do we both embrace and honor the fact that, yeah, there is some danger that happens when we are triggered, when we confront a triggering event or a person or symptom, and transform that really into an opportunity to transform and to become more present to ourselves and the bigger reality. So first off, I'd like to really go into the physiology. When something or someone triggers you, what is being triggered in your physiology? So there is the acute trigger. And I pulled up this bear because I don't know why, but people always use this scenario. You're walking in the woods and you encounter a bear. So I thought I would just use that as a demo for an acute trigger situation. What's happening? So what gets triggered is our five senses. So sensory information triggers our consciousness, energy shifts in the body ensue, and then strong reactions follow that. So that's the outer world, and there's the inner world as well. We can trigger our own selves, right? Our thoughts, our emotions, and then the sensations that might get triggered from the five senses actually can then trigger emotions and thoughts and trigger our consciousness further. So then that causes more energy shifts in the body and then stronger reactions. So what's getting triggered usually is the sympathetic nervous system, and most of us are familiar with this, at least in some fundamental way, right? That there's two systems, parasympathetic and sympathetic, and one is the rest and relax, or restore, digest. We heal, we restore our bodies. There's deep repair that happens, and then there's the sympathetic fight or flight, and this is really important, right, for survival. The key organs that we need to mobilize and to focus in an acute situation, the heart and the brain in particular, they really become activated, and our muscles, right? So we can get out of there. We can run away from the bear. And then the things that we need for daily housekeeping, our digestion, even our breathing, right? Things, our detox systems, they go way down, they shut down. We don't need that. And it conserves energy for the systems that we need in the acute situation. And we think of this as very, very dualistic, and most of the time we're in some kind of dynamic balance between the two. But in most of our lives, we have a lot of oversympathetic dominance when we're in chronic stress. So the other system that's getting triggered is the hormone system. And I highlighted in orange the stress hormone axis. So the hypothalamus, which is right in there in Shinji Palace for those of us practicing Mingjue. And then it triggers the pituitary gland and then down to the adrenal glands. And then the other hormone systems, we're all one big system. Our bodies are one big integrated system. So the other hormone systems are also affected, but a little bit more indirectly. So they are affected, in this case, by the stress hormones that get released. And you can see things too. I mean, I really liked this particular graph because things like heart, right, and stomach, kidneys, we don't, at least in Western medicine, we don't tend to think of those organs as hormone systems, but they release hormones as well. So when we begin to shift into our daily lives, we shift from the bear in the woods scenario to chronic triggers. And this is really where the systems are overloaded, right? We're overly dominant in the sympathetic fight or flight. And it could be, someone who we love who is sick, or it could be, that person could be ourselves going through a deep illness. It could be daily relationships and the stress and the disharmony that can bring. It can be the daily news, whether we're receiving it on our computers or in newspapers, magazines, or people talking about it, or it could be something that we're really confronting daily, face to face in real time. So what's happening as we're living our lives, even in moments of calm and peace, is that the emotional brain is busy at work. All right. So the limbic system is what we sometimes nickname the emotional brain. So it sits right here in the middle of the brain. And it involves the thalamus, which is kind of sensory. It's helping to process all the senses and the sensory information that's coming in. The hippocampus, which is really processing memory. And we're going to go a little bit deeper into this. It really processes it by association. Okay. And then the amygdala, emotional processing. And then the hypothalamus. So if you remember from the previous slide, this is the master gland of the hormone system. Okay, so all of these things, sensory, memory, and emotional input, are being associated also with hormones. Like, what is the hormonal response? And it's happening all the time in our waking lives and in our sleeping lives as well. So this is something we call limbic system loops. Okay, so here we have the limbic system again. And this is continually happening, right? Thoughts, emotions, sensations that we talk about, kind of our inner world, are just continually giving feedback into this system. And then limbic system is also feeding back into what are our thoughts, emotions, and sensations? What is our experience of our daily life? And here are the five senses again, going, back and forth between input and circulating in these loops. So,
external.
oops, please mute yourselves. I can't do that when I'm sharing screen. Thank you. And the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems, okay, continually kind of doing this feedback, and the hormone system, and then the hormones and the nervous system, they're also continually in this dialogue. So you can just see, like, this is continually happening, and this is how we create an inner program. This is what Teacher Wei is talking about. Like, okay, what is your inner program? All right. So most of this happens without our awareness. I think that's the real key. Most of this is happening subconsciously, which is why the Mingjue practice about awakening, a lot of, yes, there's the awakening to a much bigger sense of true self and what is the nature of the universe. And then there's this, let's wake up. Let's wake up to these subconscious patterns that are creating this inner program without our knowing it. And then in that sense, we often become what Teacher Wei calls enslaved. We become enslaved by, the things that are happening around us because it becomes overwhelming, right? It becomes overwhelming and we're continually in reactive mode. So how do we create a new inner program then that begins to place us as the master of our lives? Right? And then this is taken from Teacher Wei's book, Mingjue Awakening. And just to show the correlates, right, of physiology and the Mingjue teachings, what are emotions? Right? He says an emotion is the total sum reaction that happens at the following three levels, and that all three levels are affected. The body, which we experience as sensations, qi as energy change, and consciousness. Right? So the trigger happens at the level of information. Okay, and this is why when something is traumatic, when we experience something that we would call or label a trauma, it's very, very deep, right? It goes all the way down to the level of consciousness. And that's why consciousness is a huge part of the deeper healing of deeper wounds. So for most people, Teacher Wei says, emotions are just a fixed system of information. This means that the reference framework, right, we can even call that also the thinking mind and also the emotional brain, receives information, and this information triggers qi changes in the body. Then emotions develop in EUNT or consciousness. New information triggers the reference framework and makes more emotional reactions. This is how emotional memory develops. So that was just what we reviewed in a very, very brief way of these limbic system loops and emotional memory developing in a very deep way and integrating with our physiology, right? So the memory feels embodied. It's not just something in our minds. And if we really go down to the simplicity level of things, we're just looking at classical conditioning. Okay, so there's a lot of different inputs and stuff, but most of us have heard of Pavlov's dog experiments, right? Where the dog is exposed to some, to a food and then has an actual physiological response from the body. He begins to salivate. And then, right, the bell, there's no physiological response. And then you pair the bell with the food. And over time, through conditioning, because of the limbic system and the emotional brain and connected to the bodily systems of the nervous system and the hormone system, that the dog begins to have a conditioned response physiologically, right, to a trigger that actually did not have that. So that's just how the brain begins to learn through association. And if we go into a slightly different, more dynamic model of physiology, basically, this is a very complex graph, but what it's just showing is through this emotional and physiological and limbic system conditioning, what happens is that, let's say we're kind of at this set point, right, for homeostasis. This is our baseline. And so here down at the bottom, we're looking at stress stimuli. So that's a trigger, right? So you experience a trigger, you kind of go up, and then you come back down. That's kind of like the acute bear in the wood scenario, and you're able to fully come back to baseline, and you're just kind of moving about this set point for homeostasis. And if you look at this y-axis, that this is kind of like stress, okay? So this is how we might experience stress in our bodies. And so what happens in daily life, if we're not able to transform the triggers or to come fully back down to our baseline of rest and digest, is that these triggers and these stressful events begin to stack. Okay, so like, okay, like you had a really big fight with with someone in your family. All right, goes up. All right, you're coming down, and before you have time to really come down below back to your set point, there's another stress, right? Somebody gets really sick. Oh my, okay. So, all right, you come back up and then, okay. And then you really don't have time to come back down. And then you get in some kind of accident or, there's some major catastrophe at work. And so it comes up. And so this is usually over a long period of time. This is not sort of just like, okay, this is going to happen in a week. Okay. This is happening over a long period of time. And so then what happens is we get a new altered set point. So this is our new baseline, right? It's like a thermostat. We have a new set temperature now for our bodies. And so we're kind of hanging out over here. And I drew this line here, this line that's marking sort of symptoms or disease, right? A lot of us experience this. I certainly did. When I was young, I could have, a lot of different stressors and I would still be really, really functional. Well, at some point, oh my God, I developed symptoms and major illness, disease, right? Because I crossed this threshold. And then at this point, I can really feel it. I can feel like, oh, wait, it becomes conscious. It's not subconscious anymore. It's conscious. And so most of the time when we're dealing with triggers, we're actually hanging out at the level at which we can feel the triggers. All right. The triggers that don't manifest as symptoms that we can consciously experience or that really, yeah, provoke us to wake up, we sort of just normalize them. We're just like, oh yeah, that it's just there and I'm functional and I'm good. So we continue to live our lives through this subconscious inner program. Okay. So if the load is stacked, right, a single trigger could trigger a lot of subconscious emotions and associated sensations. So if we're hanging out at this level and we get triggered, what gets triggered often is not sort of this acute stress. What gets triggered is sort of this is what we call the allostatic load. Okay, like the whole load that we're carrying, mostly, without awareness, the whole load can potentially get triggered. And so something that feels really small, relatively, like, okay, maybe my partner said something that provoked me. Well, it can feel to the body, if I'm carrying a huge allostatic load, it can feel to the body like it's a really, really high stakes matter. Okay, it's not low stakes anymore. It's high stakes because it's triggering this whole load. So experientially, this is often what it can feel like because in trigger mode, we are activating sympathetic response, right? The fight or flight. So, okay, we got to protect ourselves. That's what the sympathetic nervous system does. Okay, so whether it's triggers in our external world or it's symptoms or thoughts or emotions in our inner world, we feel like we're going to put up a shield. And that's what our body does. And so with classical conditioning and these limbic system loops, right, it takes smaller and smaller triggers, internal or external, and we begin to feel smaller and smaller. So it takes less and less trigger to create the same or greater physiological response, right? Remembering Pavlov's dog. So our felt sense is that we are small, we are enslaved by what's happening around us, and our world physically can become smaller as we try to control for reducing triggers. So this is another piece that was a very, very deep teaching for me, where when Teacher Wei said emotions are not just made by external information, they result from ENT or Mingjue or consciousness, right, losing itself. So that what really is at stake, so there is something that is very high stakes when we are experiencing triggered emotions or triggered sensations, is that we are losing ourselves. We are losing connection to our true self. And that is a very high stakes experience to consciousness. If we are embodied consciousness beings, right, we've completely lost our true essence, connection to who we are and knowing who we are. So this really brings us to our practice, right? Is Mingjue waking up. And this is as most of us know, a process, right? Oftentimes it's not a one and done deal, but it is a process, and it's a process of continual waking up. And that's really where I want to go into the opportunity of triggers, and how do we meet them? How does Mingjue begin to teach us to meet them with grace and with gratitude, not in a positive thinking way, but in a truly embodied physiological way? And there's a way that we can practice this. We can recondition things. So this is where we begin to create a new inner program, and it's a conscious inner program. This is the foundation. This is Mingjue practice, and this is what Teacher Wei teaches us. So the connections that I was talking about, right, from the brain, from our beautiful, beautiful brains, right, always trying to process and to associate things, to solve things. Well, how do we begin to connect with our inner wiring to create physiologically a state of harmony, right? To bring it down. So a lot of times when we're doing, and I'm speaking for myself too when I say we, okay? So if we're doing the Mingjue mantra or we're doing, I don't know, some other practice, we can come to a beautiful state in our consciousness, which is in our brains. Oftentimes we kind of associate it with our brains, with our heads, with our upper dantian. And so much of the Mingjue practice is, right, Mingjue integrates and merges with the Qi body. So how do we begin to bring that down? And physiologically, the science shows us that that's the key point, and often the part that we are not very good at doing. So when something or someone triggers you, how can Mingjue change the reaction from subconscious to conscious, from re-wounding to healing? And going back to the classical conditioning, right? In Mingjue conditioning, what we're doing is we're creating a new program. So we're creating new responses to the same triggers. Okay? So just as, right, we have begun to associate, right, a trigger with something that's negative because the uncomfortable physiological sensations and emotions arise, we can begin to recondition, repattern. We're going to reassociate it with harmonizing emotions, harmonizing sensations, and harmonizing information that then gets brought down into our bodies. So in that case, information awakens consciousness. And then this consciousness changes the energy in the body from something that creates incoherence to coherence or harmony. And then we experience harmony and flow and healing of these deeper contractions. So that allostatic load that I was talking about, it begins to harmonize. We begin to not only harmonize what we can feel consciously, but this practice goes very, very deep into the deeper contractions that we might not even know we're holding. So even though we are experiencing, right, continual input from our environment, from the senses, Mingjue is still at the center, and Mingjue is awakened to itself. Mingjue knows, hey, I am the master. So I am the master receiving all of this information. And then how am I going to respond to it in a way that's conscious and not just what Teacher Wei calls instinctual, right? We're just kind of reflexively, it's more at an animalistic level. We're just a bunch of reflexes reacting to the environment. So going back to the allostatic load theory again, right? So this is the surface area where I was talking about how this is where we tend to hang out because we're aware of symptoms or sensations, memories and things that aren't comfortable. And so maybe we're practicing Mingjue, maybe we're practicing some other modality that we've learned in healing. And maybe we're just doing something that we're coping, we're just doing a coping technique. Well, we come back down, and then usually, right, like let's say we're doing the practice and we're like, okay, all good, okay, my symptoms, they're a lot better and things are good. Oh, my relationships are good. We're not triggering each other. Wow, on the global stage, like there's been some major, resolutions, and people have made some really big statements that feel harmonious. Okay, all is good. And so but we don't realize we're still hanging out at this really, really high set point. All right, so there's still all this stuff that we're kind of carrying around. And this can be individual, this can be collective on the human scale. So then what happens when another trigger comes along? Well, guess what? We come right back to that place. And I will say, this is kind of the lived sensation, the lived experience of, oh my God, I'm back at square one. Right? Because we feel like we're just kind of, moving things around, and then we do this healing, and then, oh, wait a minute, something else happens and I'm right back where I was. Well, in some way we kind of are, right? We are kind of just moving about the same set point. In many ways, we're not. If we're conscious of it, we are actually meeting the same experience or felt experience as a changed person, right? Even from now until an hour from now, we're going to be different. So if we can be aware of that, that's already recognizing that there's some change and there's a potential opportunity to transform. And so with Mingjue practice, right, when we talk about purifying or harmonizing, what we're really working to do physiologically is to continue to work through this allostatic load, the subconscious load that we're carrying, so that And then during this process, and I've seen this many times, I've also experienced this many times, we'll just be practicing. We'll just be practicing, minding our own business. Nothing's triggering us. And we're purifying and harmonizing. And what happens is because we're purifying the subconscious, the subconscious load, these old wounds, actually, it feels like the trauma is coming up. Okay. And so it's happening because of this deeper transformation. And so if we are aware of that, it's not that the trauma is happening. It's that, oh my gosh, with that character, right? Crisis, danger, and opportunity. When it comes up to the surface, when it comes to our consciousness, when it comes to the level of sensations, it gives us an opportunity to know that they're there, right? That we're still carrying this, and therefore they are naturally transforming because I'm working at a deeper level. All right, so we're working really to bring our physiological set point much, much lower. So Mingjue practices can help harmonize. So I call it the surface symptoms, right? The things that we are aware of, as well as the subconscious load. So guess what? Let's say this is our new homeostatic. This is our new set point, right? When triggers come, our physiology is much more able to integrate them, right? Maybe it blips up a little bit and then we come back down. All right, so this continual process of Mingjue, yes, Mingjue is love, Mingjue is universal peace, Mingjue is universal gratitude, and all these, the fullness of things. For me personally, the huge initial realization and aha was like, Mingjue is about emptying, right? We have to empty. So really, so much of the emptying on a physiological level is this subconscious load. And empty, empty, empty. And the more we empty, it naturally fills. Okay. So teach your way. Pain and suffering come to everyone at different times. They reveal to us the laws of life and consciousness. And so, extrapolated to triggers, right? We can say that triggers come to reveal to us the laws of health and our inner state and our subconscious load. So what is our inner state? Again, oftentimes if we are really connecting to ourselves, we're like, oh, yeah, I feel good. My inner state right now is harmony. My inner state right now is gratitude. But oftentimes that can maybe be kind of at the surface level. What is the real total inner state? And this is where triggers reveal them to us, right? It's like, oh, okay, I've healed this relationship, and a trigger comes along in that I'm like, oh, nope, I haven't quite gotten there. I'm still carrying something that I can continue to harmonize. And the reason it's not just about, okay, how pure am I? How harmonized am I? And as a doctor, I care about health, right? So this allostatic load contributes, if you remember that y-axis, it's stress mediators. It's the stress that the body is experiencing. So that correlates with inflammation. It correlates with, increased risk of chronic disease. And so this is really, oh, okay, these triggers revealing to us our total load is an opportunity to see how can I heal more? Whether you have an active health condition that you're hoping to heal, or something that you really want to prevent. All right, building resilience. So there are a few steps, right? So when we are confronted with a trigger, the first one is general relaxation. Okay, and so this is the first step for all Mingjue practices, and this can be also general Qigong. This can be, again, any other practice. It could be a coping mechanism, right? How do we acutely relax? Okay, and then how do we stimulate this image is showing the vagus nerve. Okay, how do we stimulate the vagus nerve, which is the primary nerve of that parasympathetic nervous system? How do we bring ourselves into relaxation? Okay, and a lot of times Mingjue practice is great for this, but this is not enough for Mingjue transformation and really, really coming in to purify and harmonize the subconscious load. So the second step is heart-brain coherence. And I just put on there, you can go much deeper into it if you haven't already, but this is a whole other workshop and talk that I gave about the science of flow, of embodied flow. and what's called heart coherence, right? Having to do with the biofields of the body. So it works in conjunction with, but is separate from the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system on the physical level. They're separate and very interrelated systems. Okay, so there's an energetic flow that we can come into with Mingjue practice. And then the third, which is really the foundation and the big transformative power tool of this system, is that Mingjue awakens to itself. Okay, so that can happen on the personal level, right? We awaken to our true selves. We know who we are as individuals, as individual consciousnesses, and then Mingjue. Then all of this happens, not in a stepwise way, right? It kind of happens either together or one happens out of sequence. So, but I'm just breaking it down. So Mingjue also awakens to Mingjue and others. Okay, and in this flow state, that's how we connect. We connect energetically and through information. So even if we're physically not in the same place, or we're physically not touching, that there is a transformation that happens from incoherence or chaos, disorder, to coherence and flow and harmony. That's how that physiologically we experience coherence as harmony. Okay, so that's at the collective level. And then Mingjue emerges with the Qi universe. So there begins to be an embodied sense of a universal oneness, right? So even as we're going about our day, we can actually experience this oneness. And the oneness is the information and energy level experience of love. Okay, everything is coming together. Everything has become union in one. So right now, I thought we would go into a short practice just to begin to see how we can use these, the understanding of how do we reassociate our, the limbic system, right? The emotional brain with the physiology of the body to really bring healing to us as a whole. And in life, right? Life is going to give us events, and life right now, I don't know what's happening on the planet, but it is continually giving us major opportunities to transform triggers. But when we have a choice, right? When we're in that period of time of like, oh, you know what? There's a little bit of breathing space. There's a little bit of, wow, okay, I can, I don't have to continually feel like I'm shielding myself or quote, battling triggers, right, against that dragon, is we can begin to do it incrementally. And this is where I feel like the true opportunity is we have to see these times not just as times of relaxation, but times that we can begin to train Mingjue to wake up and to reprogram what's happening in our physiology. Okay. So I'm going to show just 3 different slides, and I'm really inviting you to make this your own practice. You may feel triggered by, one or all 3 of the images. You may feel none because you're in a good place, or you feel a little bit detached from what's happening on the screen. It's okay. All right. Regardless, this is one example of how you can begin to incrementally train in your own life, right? When the timing feels right. And in your own life, the ideal time, again, to really practice retraining, bringing Mingjue down into the body, is if there's a trigger that's not completely overwhelming, that's not, just evoking such strong sensations and emotions that you feel overwhelmed. So paying attention to that, right? Teacher Wei and Dr. Pong call it catching the thief. So if you feel this pattern coming and something relatively small happens, that's a really, really ripe opportunity to practice going deeper and retraining the inner program. Okay. So I invite you to, if you're not already, just get in a comfortable and quiet place. And just begin to breathe into your lower dantian. Right, that's in the center of your abdomen. And so with this simple breathing into lower dantian, right, it's a way that we return to ourselves. We bring our minds down into our bodies. So this alone can begin to reprogram your inner program. As a teacher Wei will say, okay, if you can breathe lower dantian throughout your day, you're done. You're basically done. Okay. So when we are centered in lower dantian and we are connected with just the rhythmic expansion and contraction of the chi ball in our center, we're also much more present to our environment. Okay, because we're centered in ourselves. So we're not losing ourselves to everything around us, but we're also at the same time we're receiving more sensory input, right? We're more aware because this is a place of deep observation, deep listening. So you can begin to understand how this practice is not only centering in ourselves, but when we enhance our sensory awareness, life also becomes much more abundant. Right? So we begin to separate out the duality that we tend to, okay, is life, good right now, or is it bad? Is life really challenging right now, or is it a blessing? These dualities actually begin to dissolve. We just experience this as aliveness. Okay? So as you continue breathing in lower dantian, right, just observing any sensations or thoughts or emotions that are arising within you. Right, and just observing. So if happiness comes, if grief comes, anger, maybe it's a sensation of tightness, pain, just observing all of it without any labels. You go into your medical portal and there's some medical results awaiting you. Or maybe it's a relationship. It could be a doctor, it can be a partner, a parent, a child, a stranger. It can be yourself. So one of the things is with Mingjue practice, what we're really doing is we're transforming our relationship to the sensations and the emotions and the thoughts that are arising. Right? It actually has much, much less to do with what's actually happening outside. It's what they're provoking within us. It's losing connection with ourselves, our true selves. And that's the reason we have such strong reactions. So if the sensations that are arising or the emotions are very strong, right, sometimes breathing in lower dantian is not going to cut it. All right, it feels like maybe we're just suppressing more, or maybe the sensations and the whole experience is just too overwhelming. So this is always Mingjue as the master, right? But this is where you can begin to meet the intensity of the experience with either movements that we've learned or sounds that we've learned, right? So let's say the sensations that you're observing or the thoughts, emotions are manifesting a lot in the head, right? Something you can either practice the n sound, very, very quickly, loudly, kind of harmonize with an intention to harmonize, right? Not to suppress, harmonize, inside out, almost like shock waves, breaking things up. It can be the shu sound, right? Just allowing things to dissolve, inviting things to dissolve. Actually, in intense situations, Mingjue is commanding things to dissolve, okay? You can do the movement, right? The crane's head. Begin to, and maybe it's going to look a little bit more vigorous, right? Because the intensity of things is okay. You just want to move things around, all right? Maybe the sensations are in the chest or in the middle dantian area. Maybe it's in your heart, in your breasts. Maybe it's a catch in your breath, all right? So yeah, you know what? You can begin to rotate your shoulders, right? Open up, keeping the chest cavity, keeping the heart open, flowing, right? You can do Chen Qi, right? This one, right? Okay, I'm going to keep my heart open. My heart's contracting. I'm going to keep it open, right? Maybe it's in the abdomen. You may be feeling a punch in the gut. You're feeling something really strong there. You can begin to do, right, low spine rotations. You don't have to get up from your chair. But if it's really intense, you can get up and you can do hip rotations, right? You can do pelvic thrusts. I don't know what the teacher Wei calls this, but there's many different tools that we have to harmonize when things are intense. Okay, so one of the practices, one of the tools one of the coaching, approaches that we have is you meet the intensity of that moment with much more rigorous sound and or movement. Okay. And then you come to this place of, oh, okay, yeah, things feel a little bit more relaxed. Like the acuity of things is a little, I can actually sit in stillness. Right? So maybe we're still at the surface level of waves, but things are calmer and the symptoms are not so intense. And so this is the opportunity to go deeper, right? We don't just end there. Nope, we go into Mingjue practice. Right? So maybe you play a short recording of Teacher Wei. Maybe you play a short recording of your teacher, your organizer. A practice that really resonates with you. So one thing I'm going to encourage you to do is, yeah, if you're in a live session with Teacher Wei, if you're watching a recording of one of his sessions, if you're in a session with one of your teachers and something really, really is powerful for you, record that. Put it on voice memos, put it somewhere where it's very accessible. And then when you're triggered and you've harmonized the acuity of the thing, you go immediately into Mingjue, coming back to the self, right? Coming back to breathing in lower dantian. Saying the n sound. Connecting with your true self. Connecting with the collective field. The collective field is filling the entire atmosphere all around you. Right? So connecting with the collective field like a centimeter all around your body. Knowing that that is teeming with universal love, universal peace. And that you're breathing that in through all your pores. You're breathing it in as information, as qi, and as air. Right, so you begin to change the inner programming, like, oh, trigger begins to associate with relaxation, begins to reassociate with coming back into the body, begins to reassociate with universal love, collective field wisdom, supporting us as close as our breath. Yep. So this is the third part, and Teacher Wei is he is, I've heard him say it this way. He'll say, like, particularly when he's talking about the Mingjue mantra, right? I am Mingjue love, I am Mingjue peace, I am Mingjue happiness, I am Mingjue gratitude. And he'll say, create that feeling, create an inner experience. So what he's inviting us to do is to actually bring that into our physiology, right? So what does universal love feel like? What does universal peace feel like in the body? Not in your thoughts, in the body. So as you're breathing in lower dantian, maybe you're still doing open close, right? Whatever is bringing you harmony. So what does it feel like? And this is where we begin to bring it back into the senses, right? We bring it back to the sensory level. We're meeting our bodies at the level of form, because the form level is where the energy and the information are more stable. Okay, so we're trying to stabilize this state. And so we do that by incorporating the senses, by incorporating the visceral experience of this, right? Because Mingjue emptiness, we can go into these trance states, these expansive states, and there's no sensory experience. It's an emptiness. It's very subtle. How do we bring that back into the level of the physical body? And so you can give this, maybe like a color. What does it feel like? One of my favorite practices is to do the, big circulation, or what I like to call, the chi waterfall, right? Is to be, okay, bring that, golden chi is just pouring through my body, right? What does that feel like? To begin to experience that viscerally, right? And I really invite you, come up with your own. What feels alive to you, right? So maybe some of you, there's a smell. Maybe it's the smell of walking in a forest after a gentle rain. Maybe it's the smell of newborn skin. Maybe it's the smell of a rose. So give this experience a smell, give it a color, give it a and then be a feeling. So a lot of times, if we're practicing and you're experiencing like warmth, there's like a warmth coming over you. Okay, or maybe it's tingling. With a lot of Qigong practice, we have tingling. So these are all signs that the limbic system has begun to rewire a physiological response that's in the body. All right, so we are beginning to bring that healing potential to that level, and then we stabilize. We're stabilizing that program. Right? So then we always close, right, with hands over lower dantian. Stabilize it further. Stabilize it further. So just to recap, and I invite you, even as I'm finishing the concluding slides, is to stay in the state, to stay connected with lower dantian breathing while you're observing. Okay, so the primary awareness is within yourself, and the experience that you are the observer, observing what is on the screen. Your primary experience is the experience, not what's happening on the outside. Right, so this is just to ask, to restate, Right? How do you know if if you've retrained your limbic system and physiological pathways? Right? Your body will tell you, okay, through these visceral sensations. And the more and more we practice, the less and less we need those visceral sensations, because that program's already been established. It becomes second nature. Okay, so this is just the summary of what we talked about. So meeting the intensity of the symptoms with movement or sound practices. Then once we're calmer, more relaxed, Mingjue practice, go deep to return to yourself. And again, in daily life, this could be a 5-minute recording. Okay, and Teacher Wei's been, and your organizer's been sharing some recent recordings that are short. They're much more accessible. But then doing the longer program, the practices to go deeper into that state, to bring your body into this new experience. What does it feel like to be in Mingjue state, to be in flow state, to be in, a much more expanded experience of ourselves? And then third is to create that visceral experience, okay? What does unconditional love, joy, gratitude, what does it feel like? And I'm going to go through this very quickly, but this is something that I have lived into and also really observed in hearing other people's shares and also coaching other people. So, but this terminology is something that came to me when I was at a recent retreat, and it really came from the collective field. And I did share this with Teacher Wei, and he gave his thumbs up because I said, I'm curious if I should include it in this workshop, and he gave his thumbs up. So really what I call provoke, evoke, and invoke, okay? So correlating with what we had just talked about over this past hour, right? We have an event that triggers a lot of subconscious emotions and symptoms. And this is usually where what we call triggers. And that's why it's always associated with something negative, right? So in that case, it might cause some trauma, right? It's like the subconscious things are coming up, and that experience itself feels traumatic. So it depends on what our inner resources are, right? So even at this provoke stage, the triggering also can serve as a chance to transform what arises. So if we're in this practice, we're like, oh, you know what, there it is. Okay, there's more stuff. It's an opportunity to transform that, right? And at this level, again, these are very big generalizations, and each of these stages they're fluid, right? So it's not just like progressive in a linear way. So emotions feel chemical and hormonal. So there's a heaviness often to this, and they feel very uncomfortable. Okay, there's a density to it. The effects can therefore last a while, and it oftentimes can take us time to feel like we need to recover or recenter. Okay, then there's what I call evoke. So, okay, something's happening. Let's say we're watching something happening on the news, and there's a great suffering that's happening. All right, so the event triggers emotions and sensations, but because either it's not entangled with whatever deeper wounds that we are personally harboring, or we've done a lot of harmonizing and purifying, and so therefore the allostatic load is lower, right? So we're not experiencing a major trigger. The emotions and the sensations that we're experiencing with that trigger are largely related to that external situation at hand or that person. Okay, so there's less subconscious stuff getting entangled with the present event, and the emotions in this stage can still feel chemical and kind of this hormonal kind of emotion, but they're lighter, right? We can even experience them as a pleasant kind of rawness because it feels passionate. It makes us feel alive. Okay. And then the experience can be more fleeting. It's like, oh, you know what? Oh, wow, my anger just really dissipated. Oh, that was fast, right? Or, oh, wow, my excitement is there. And then it just kind of melts away because it's just relating to whatever's happening. And then there's what I call invoke, right? So you've done so much practice where the emotional brain is now fully wired in a Mingjue way physiologically, right? So you have a triggering event. What does it trigger? It triggers Mingjue. So Mingjue then, the event then triggers universal love, compassion, and further awakening to the oneness and entirety, right? So beauty and love and infinite love are experienced in all things, right? So it's not to say, oh, I love the suffering that's happening right in front of me or in the world. It's to say, oh, wow, this is all of it is an opportunity to invoke more universal love, to respond as Mingjue love, right? So, and at this state or stage, emotions feel energetic. There's others might perceive us as radiant, okay? Because we are in this state of flow, of radiance, of energy, the bioenergy of the body. And so there's, in terms of like time, if we're talking about experience of time, it's actually something that's very pervasive or eternal, sort of beyond time. Like there's kind of a floaty quality, and there's no sense of like, oh, how long is this going to last, and how long, oh wow, because there's a lighter quality as well. So I just wanted to share that, and I've seen it so often that people, are having a different relationship and experience to being triggered. Okay. And just two concluding slides of Teacher Wei's words. At some point, when your inner space is ripe, an event or person might challenge or trigger you. Instead of trying to stay in Mingjue state, you simply are in Mingjue state. The duality disappears. The boundary of observation disappears. There is no observer anymore, and no observation either. You have become yourself at this point. The Mingjue state remains without the need for the intention to maintain the state. It is just there. When you observe and forget the intention, there's no effort anymore. There's no attachment to the external world. There's no attachment to the observer. You do not need to think, I am Mingjue. You do not need to find Mingjue or attach to Mingjue. You are the observer. You are. This doesn't guarantee that life will be easy and comfortable. It means that no matter what life presents, you can respond with compassion and clarity. You will not lose yourself to external triggers, bodily sensations, or other people, and you know who you are. Unshakable Mingjue love. And so this is just a visual depiction of what if triggers triggered this? And all of us were just walking around like this. So this is the Mingjue practice. This is the Mingjue challenge.